Brian McGinnis here, the Chair of the Smart Growth Committee, calling the committee meeting to order on Wednesday, July 10th at 7, no, Finance Committee meeting order at Wednesday, July 10th at 7:15 with my colleagues Nicole Shimoni and Brian Travis. Item number 2, comments, suggestions, petitions by residents in attendance regarding items not on the agenda. Seeing none, discussion items. The 2023 draft financials presented, it looks like this is Christopher?
Yeah,
Christopher. Thank you. Come on up.
All right, so my name's Chris Ratnardo. I'm the audit manager from Malley, our accounting firm. So first, I'm going to skip to page 3 of the draft. This is our independent audit report. This year, we're issuing an unmodified opinion. That's a clean opinion. So that's what you want to see. I want to thank Barb for doing such a good job again this year. Every year, the audit process gets easier and easier. So, so the rest of the audit report, it's pretty much the same language as we've had in prior years. So the second major paragraph is the basis of opinion, just talks about how we come up with our opinion. Then next is the responsibilities of management over the financial statement. Page 4 will explain the auditor's responsibilities of the financial statement. And page 5 talks about where you could find the required supplementary information and the supplementary information, which I'll talk about a little bit later on. Page 6I, this is the management discussion and analysis. This is unaudited language, but we do make sure all the amounts in the MD&A match the face of the financial statement. And then Barb and other members of the borough come up with all the narrative and make sure it reads how they would like. So feel free to read through the MD&A. I'm not going to go through that in detail. So I'm going to skip to page 7 of the financial statement. This is the statement of net position. It's essentially the government-wide balance sheet, which is reported on a full accrual. So in 2023, the governmental activities had total assets of 16.7 million, and the business type activities had total assets of 8.2 million for total assets of about 25 million. Majority of the assets is cash and accounts receivable. Majority of the accounts receivable comes from the stormwater and sewer fees that have not been collected yet. Also, the borough has about $8.4 million in investments. Total non-current assets for the governmental activities is 25.5 million. For business type activities, 27.5 million. For total non-current assets of 53 million. Majority of these assets are for equipment, infrastructure, land, buildings, things like that, construction in progress. There's also a long-term lease receivable, and this comes from, since the borough owns the parking garage, there's 3 businesses that pay rent to the borough. So that brings us, and then total assets for the borough is about $78 million. Deferred inflows of resources, about 5.7 million for governmental activities, 272,000 for business type, and 5.9 million for the borough as a whole. And this comes from the actuaries. It's mainly consists of the pension and OPEB activity, which we pull right from the actuary reports and their assumptions. So total assets and deferred outflows for the borough of a whole has about $84 million. Current liabilities at the governmental activities is 2.6 million. Business type activity current liabilities is 933,000, and the borough has about 3.6 million in total current liabilities. Majority of this is just the accounts payable.
I'm sorry, can you get to the balance sheet? You're on the
It should be page 7.
I'm a visual person, and so I'm trying to visualize, but I'm having trouble. Sorry. I'll print it out.
Yeah, scroll up a little bit. One more. So right there. Now I'm on the bottom half, so. Good. Sorry about
Thank
that.
you.
I didn't know it wasn't up there. So total current liabilities for the borough as a whole is 3.6 million. Most of that is accounts payable, bills that the borough has due, and accrued liabilities. Most of the accrued liabilities just consist of accrued payroll. Also, there's about $366,000 in unspent ARPA proceeds. Non-current liabilities for governmental activities, about 19.5 million. Business type is 11.9 million for total non-current liabilities of 31 million. This consists mainly of compensated absences, the long-term debt for bonds or notes payable, the net pension liability, and the OPEB liability, which I'll talk about a little more in the footnotes. Deferred inflows of resources for governmental activities, 3.5 million. Business type, 670,000. And as a whole, 4.2 million. Again, this mainly consists of the pension and OPEB activity, which we pull right from the actuary report. So total net position for the governmental activities is about 22.2 million. Business type activities, 22.4 million. And the borough as a whole has a net position of 44.7 million. Next, I'm going to go to page 8. This is the statement of activities. It's essentially the profit and loss on a full accrual basis for the borough. So governmental activities had about $22 million in expense this year. For program revenues, the governmental activities had 6.3 in charges for service, 1.7 million in operating grants and contributions, and 1.9 million in capital grants. This brings a net deficit of 11.9 million, which has to be made up in general revenues, which is essentially taxes, franchise fees, lease revenues, and other net investment income. So total general revenues for the governmental activities was 17.2 million for a positive change in net position of 5.2 million for the governmental activities. For the business type activities, total expenses were 7.3 million. Charges for service revenue, 11.4 million, in operating grants and contributions of 12 million for a positive change in program revenues less expense of 4.1 million. And then when you add the general revenues less any transfers, the business type activities had a positive change in fund balance of 1.6 million. Next, I'm going to go over the balance sheet for the governmental funds on page 9. So the main fund for the governmental fund, and this is a modified accrual, and I'll show you the reconciliation on the next page, but the general fund, this is essentially the operating fund of the borough. So this is where majority of the bills are paid. So total assets of 5.4 million in the general fund. The general fund had total liabilities of 2.1 million, deferred inflows of 188,000, which is unavailable property taxes at year end, and a total fund balance of 3.1 million. The capital operating reserve fund had total assets of 8.7 million, no liabilities, and total fund balance agrees to total assets of 8.7 million. The stormwater fund had total assets of 2.9 million, total liabilities of 1.3 million, and a fund balance of 1.5 million. And then the non-governmental funds have total assets of 1.1 million, total liabilities of 307,000, notes receivable as a deferred inflow of 20,000, and a total fund balance of 795,000. And the non-major governmental funds alone as a fund, they're just not large enough to be presented as a major fund, which is why they get summarized as one. But there is a separate financial statement in the end of the financial, which will summarize each one of those funds by themselves. Page 10, this is the reconciliation of total governmental fund balance to the net position. Essentially, the government-wide financial statements, they are full accrual, so they capitalize things like capital assets, and they show liabilities like the pension liabilities, OPEB liabilities, and any notes. whereas on the fund level statements, debt service payments are just expense when incurred. It doesn't offset the liability. And you'll see capital assets, there'll be a capital outlay expense on the fund level statements, whereas those expenses will get capitalized on the full accrual statement. Next page, page 11, this is the statement of revenues and expenditures and fund balance for the governmental funds. So the general fund had total revenues of 21.4 million, total expenses of 23 million, other financing sources of 2.5 million for a positive net change in fund balance of $1 million. The capital operating reserve fund had total revenues of 361,000, total expenditures of 14,000 for a positive change in fund balance of $347. Stormwater had 1.6 million in total revenues, total expenditures of 204,000, other financing sources of uses, a use of $153,000 for a total net change in fund balance of 1.2 million. And the non-major funds had revenues of 1.3, expenses of 1.7, total other sources of 312,000 for a positive change in fund balance of $403,000. Page 12, this is the reconciliation that goes from the P&L of the fund level statements to the government wide. Again, it's just showing the current year debt payments and things like capital assets. They're expensed again on the fund level statements, and it's just showing how it's getting capitalized and accounting for depreciation on the government wide statement. Page 13, this is the proprietary fund. Essentially, they're business type funds, so they charge a service to operate. So sewer fund had total current assets of about $5 million, total non-current assets of 8.1 for total assets of 13.1 million. And again, they had 141,000 in deferred outflows for pension activity. Total current liabilities of 185,000, non-current liabilities of 183,000 for total liabilities of 369,000, and a deferred inflow of 75,000 for a total net position of $12.8 million. The parking fund had total current assets of 3.2 million, total non-current assets of 19.3 million, total deferred outflows of 131,000 for total assets and deferred outflows about 22.6 million, total current liabilities of 747,000, total non-current liabilities of 11.7 million, total liabilities of 12.4, deferred inflows about 595,000 for a total net position of 9.5 million. Page 14, this is the statement of revenues and expense for changes in fund balance for the proprietary funds. Again, this is just the P&L. So, and this pretty much mirrors the government-wide statement because business type funds are full accrual. So essentially we did already go over this. So in the sake of time, I'm just going to pass that. Page 15, this is the statement of cash flows. It essentially just lists out the ins and outs of cash. So feel free to read through that. I'm not going to go through that in much detail. Page 18, this is the statement of change in fiduciary funds. Essentially, this is the balance sheet for the police and non-uniform pension funds. So, I'm sorry, did I skip some? Sorry, page 17. So total assets for the pension trust funds were about 69 million. Essentially, all that comes from the investments in the police and non-uniform pension fund. Liabilities of 32,000 for a restricted net position for pensions of about 69,000. Then page 18, this shows all the investment activity and payments throughout the year. So the pension trust funds had total additions of 12 million, total deductions of 3.6 million for a change in net position of 8.6 million. Then starting on page 19, this is the summary of significant accounting policies. What this footnote explains is how we account for every single line item on the financial statement. This wording is pretty much the same as it has been in previous years, so I'm not going to go through that in detail. So feel free to read through that. And that's page 19 through about page 27. Then on page 28, this is the deposits and investment footnote. Essentially, the borough has $14.1 million in the bank. And of that, $2 million was covered by federal depository insurance, $6.2 million was uninsured, and about $5.7 million was deposited in Pliget, which they have their own insurance program. Next on page note D, it's page 30. This is the lease receivable footnote. So feel free to read through this. This explains the leases that the borough has with local businesses that pay them monthly or annually. Page 32, note F. This is our capital asset footnote. So this will show you all the current year additions or any disposals in capital assets and current year depreciation. Page 35, this is the long-term liabilities footnotes. So this will tell you how much the borough still owes in long-term liabilities and the current year repayments. There were no new general obligation notes in the current year. And skipping to page 40, this starts the police pension plan, and then it goes to the non-uniform pension plan footnote. Essentially, this explains all the inputs that the actuaries use to come up with their pension liabilities. And then the following footnote after that talks about the OPEB plan, and again, explains all the actuaries' inputs and market valuations. The main important thing in these footnotes is for police, there was a $2.8 million decrease in the liability in the current year, and non-uniform, there was a $3.1 million decrease in the current year for the non-uniform pension liability. And then for the post-employment benefits other than pensions, which is essentially OPEB, there was a $2.2 million decrease in that liability in the current year. And that footnote L starts on page 52. Then starting on page 66, this is the supplementary information. Essentially, this just consists, or I'm sorry, I skipped over the required supplementary information. I just want to have a couple comments on that. So the required supplementary information, this is essentially the budget to actual. And then there's also police and non-uniform pension schedules that just shows the liability information in the past 10 years. The important thing in these schedules for this year is the police and non-uniform had about a 10 or 15% investment gain on their plan in the current year. And that is page 57 through 66. And then the supplementary information starts on page 66. And again, these will just break down all the non-major funds into their own fund. I'm not going to go over them in detail. And then it'll also show the police pension plan statements by themselves and the non-uniform pension plan statements by themselves. So that concludes my presentation on the draft, unless there's any questions.
Thank you. Any questions on the dais?
I just have one question about the credit rating.
Okay.
It's AA minus. Is that based on 1 year, 3 years? I just noticed that was part of the report, and I was wondering what was driving the minus part, why it wasn't AA or AA plus.
I could definitely get back to you on that. I don't know off the top of my head, but I'll definitely research. We get those right from the actuary report, so we'll have to ask them why that was the
More of a
credit
curiosity,
rating.
and I just wanted to know whatever time horizon was actually based on, or what credit rating
Right.
agency was actually reporting that.
Yeah, we could definitely get you an answer on that.
Thank you.
Any further questions? Any public comment? Thank you, Chris.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. All right, item B, the June 2024 financials. Barb, take it away.
Good evening. If we could start the report on page 2, please. So for the month of June, we started the month with 24,946,455 in cash. We brought in 4,394,515. We spent or transferred between funds 4,916,840, and this left us with an ending cash balance across all funds, restricted and for operations of 24,424,130. Looking at the summary pages in the next section of the report, across all funds, all departments are meeting their budget expectation of 50% of their line items remaining. I'd like to give a nice shout out to all of the department heads. They've done a very good job through the first half of the year controlling their expenses. I think it's important that we continue that trend through the end of the year. Looking over at the general fund, the fund is sitting at a net income year-to-date of $2,929,198. On the revenue side, we continue to see strong EIT and real estate taxes. Our EIT is doing very well. Based on what it is trending now, I do expect it to be over budget for the year. We also have strong performance in our interest earnings in Pliget. We have a 41,000 excess over budget in the general fund. So those rates are doing very well there. I still have concerns that we've kind of talked about in the last couple months about D-transfer. It is picking up, but it's, not quite where we want it to be at this point in time, as well as the lien taxes. So again, through June 30th, I would like to be cautiously optimistic that those two line items will hopefully catch up to where we need to be for year end. Looking at the expense side for the general fund, there's no major significant expenses to bring to your attention, but I did want to point out that we did transfer $550,000 into the police pension fund to pay down the second quarter MMO payment. That money came directly from the 0.25 EIT Pliget account that we have for borough residents to pay the additional EIT rate. So as of 6/30, the police MMO balance is $714,206. We did not make any transfer to the non-union plan. We made a transfer back in March of $100,000. So at this point in time, the non-union MMO balance is $230,093, and we plan to fund the rest of that with the state aid that we will receive in September, as well as budgeted parking and sewer transfers. Looking at the special revenue funds, fire and stream protection, both are doing well. There's no items of significance there. And then moving over to the enterprise funds, sewer and parking. Sewer is sitting at a net income year-to-date of $1,660,857, and the parking fund is sitting at a net income of $588,935. So we're sitting in a good position with. I'm sorry, did you miss something?
Yeah, we're not following along on the screen.
Oh, if you scroll down, Jeff. So that's where my numbers are coming from right there. That's the sewer, and then the next page would be the parking. So again, we have the first 6 months of the year behind us. Looking forward to ending the year positively. That's probably didn't say that right. Some things to look at to remain strong for the rest of the year is good cash management. Getting a good comfort level of what if we have any excess cash that we can kind of transfer over into the Pliget funds to get a couple 3 to 4 months on some interest earnings there. Managing our ARs, that's going to be a strong push moving forward to the end of the year, both for sewer, stream protection, parking, any permits, anything that is out there that is owed to us and is outstanding. And of course, just maintaining the GL line items. I know that there's always going to be emergencies, but it's how we respond to that. And if there's anything we can kind of push off or, look at a different way to handle, I think is going to be important, ending the year. So, is there any questions?
Thank you. Any questions on the dais?
I'm okay. I'm just wondering why, okay, I'll ask it since, I'm wondering why the parking permits and the lots revenue is trailing budget. Is it because people aren't coming to town as much? Is it related to some of the changes we're making as we recalibrate? Do we have any kind of thoughts on that?
Parking permits, are you talking 36322? Which the budget there is 145,000, but we're only at 47,000 through the year. Is that what the line you're talking about?
Yes, I'm seeing revenue trends and that parking permits and lots revenue is trailing. So yeah, that's probably.
Got it. So that's because a lot of our residential parking permits renew in a gigantic tsunami in August. So.
Oh, so it's not a 50%. So if the budget, that was another question I had earlier, that everything, if all the expenses are 50%, are there actually some waves and ebbs and flows? And if our expectations are 50%, but just because it's the middle of the year, are there areas that we might need to relook at because we might not be as in good of shape, or we might be in better shape than we think?
Yeah, and I can probably do a better job of kind of, putting it out there why they may not be exactly at that point in time, because, generally there's always a simple answer for it most of the time. So
Yeah, and
Yeah,
if we're
I'll
trying.
make sure that I update that
Yeah,
in my summary.
Okay.
Yep, I can certainly do that.
Any public comment? All right, seeing none. Thank you, Barb. Item C, the special events fee.
So I just put this on here as a discussion topic because I know that it was brought up at last month's council meeting. I did not prepare any sort of calculation. I thought that I would kind of run through the background of how the fee was calculated and then kind of take it from there, what you want your input, if we want to change it or what it wants to be moving forward, if that's okay with the committee.
Yeah.
Because I think there's been a lot of questions about how the numbers were kind of created and why, we were doing what we were doing. So this fee was calculated back in the 2017 to 2018 timeframe by the prior finance director and the administration at that time. And kind of the reason for, putting this together was to try to recoup some of the costs that we were spending, because that's not something that we had done in the past. And if you look back at our financial statements back at those point in times, things were a lot leaner than they are now. So that was kind of the starting point to, look at some of these things and what can we charge and try to recoup some of the costs. The one big item that you'll see on there is the salary expense for the police and public works. While some of those seem high, they're not necessarily. It's, the hourly rate plus the overhead costs that are associated with that. So trying to capture a piece of the pension, the medical expense, your FICA, your workers' comp, your general insurance, all of those things are kind of calculated into that number. And then trying to recoup costs for, equipment, materials, depreciation on vehicles, and then the parking revenue reduction. So that's sort of what the background and why, the numbers that we have now before us are what they are.
Would it make sense going forward to incorporate some of the special events into the overall budget?
You mean the revenues or I'm not sure where you're.
So we have the special events fees that we're going to charge for whatever, say, for example, the Clydesdales. came in, right? Wouldn't it be possible to move forward that we set aside something in the budget for that, like under special events, maybe a certain amount every year, and then whatever we don't use goes back in to the budget? I mean, on average, over the last couple of years, to see what that would be.
Where would it come from? Like what other part of the budget, right? You'd have to pull it from somewhere else at this point in time, I guess, to get it started.
At this point in time, correct, but moving forward, it could be put into maybe its own separate type of fund.
So we currently do, under the recreation department, we do have, revenues and expenses associated with some of the major events. We have the restaurant festival, pop-up events, Turk's Head, those sorts of things. So we are budgeting revenues for that. I mean, we can certainly take a look at that. Budget time is coming up. If we want to maybe calculate that anyway differently, or
I think either calculator or just make sure that, everything's going to be uniform moving forward. I mean, I don't think it hurts to look into that.
And just to flesh out the idea a little bit more, it would be an expense account, but then take those dollars and subsidize certain special events that way?
I think that would make sense, and then
Okay.
we could put that into an investment account for the time being, right? Next year, and have that earn interest until we pay it off. And then whatever we use, and if we don't, then we could put that back into the overall budget. Any further comment?
No, I don't have any
Any further?
comments.
Okay, any public comments? See, Mr. O'Brien?
John O'Brien, downtown Westchester. So I have obviously had conversations individually, sent some thoughts to the members of this committee. I think, as far as a path forward, a big piece is predictability of understanding what the cost before we engage an event is going to be. I've mentioned, for instance, in the email, we intend to hopefully bring back our Chris Kindle Mark, which is a partnership with the Chester County Art Association. Last year, it was approximate cost about like $5,000 to $7,000. That included parking, police, public works, etc. This year, because of mainly driven by more, it was a very successful event, so more officers are going to be required. We're looking at about a $21,000 bill. So that's obviously a huge increase, and we're trying to kind of figure out a plan for this. The current structure, I think when we're looking at creating a structure, because we don't, my organization is not looking to ask the borough to eat a lot of budget here, but the true cost is going to be the overtime cost for an employee. So when they're actually at the event working. Vehicle depreciation, any actuary will tell you a vehicle is going to depreciate whether it's sitting here at 401 East Gay Street or it's sitting up in the CBD. The medical costs are a stagnant cost for your employees. So whether we had no special events or we had 10 more special events than we already do, the medical costs are going to be the same. Pension costs, I guess it depends on how the pension is calculated. If I'm not aware whether or not overtime costs count for the final 3 or 5 year average salary of a public works employee or a police officer. Planning time ahead, obviously if work is being conducted between the normal, whatever the schedule is, 9 to 5, let's just theoretically say, that's not an additional expense for the borough in that regard. So understanding why the original fees were created, I think that there is room that we can all kind of come together and create a fee structure which is fair to the borough, but then allows us to have more or continue to have the special events that we do in town. It's not only just for downtown Westchester. I don't want to sit up here and speak for other organizations, but I know the Greater Westchester Chamber of Commerce has interest in this. I know obviously you've heard from the Friends of Marshall Square Park are interested in this. The Westchester Green Team is interested in this.
I know specifically I've had conversations with the green team around, the cost structure for Porch Fest this year. I think they were, I'm not sure how it worked out before, but they got a larger bill than anticipated this year. So they were trying to work through that. So for a path forward, if council were open, I think, bringing those organizations together, members of the police, Barb, member, whether it's Sean or somebody designates, to kind of look at that fee structure, see if those organizations can create something that, all those parties agree to is fair, and then present to council. That could be a path forward that we can actually get some movement here. Those were some initial thoughts. I mean, I know I presented to you my initial thoughts, but that's, it's not just the world according to John. So obviously there's other groups who are going to want to weigh in on that.
Yeah, I'm in agreement. I mean, I think a more holistic approach, bringing all these groups together, seeing what we could do with a budget next year. I think that does make sense.
Yeah, I mean, I think it has to be, whatever we land on has to be kind of fair. And because right now we're just getting people like, hey, waive my fees. And we're like, okay, and it's like, there's no, I don't, well, you did it last year. I guess that's the biggest rhyme or reason that I've seen so far. Oh, you did it last year. All right. But there's, we kind of have to have an understanding of what our standard is, because we have these fees, but we're waiving them left and right. And it's like,
Right.
Is that really fair in the grand scheme of things? So if we relook at it again and we get to something, then my understanding would be that we wouldn't do a lot of fee waiving as much, because we feel like we've landed on something that's fair for everyone, and we wouldn't have to sit up here and address people asking for this off, this percentage off, or, like we're Macy's or something, and you shouldn't get anything at full
You
price.
can
at
hand out
Macy's.
coupons.
Yeah, you have to always have a coupon.
Right, 'cause
with
I mean,
50% off.
From my perspective, I don't want to have to come to council hat in hand all the time. We want to work with council. Obviously, it's a quality of life. It's why people move to town. It's why people visit this town, both in the town center, but also in our parks. They want to have that community feel and have that draw of people coming together. But we need to figure out ways, especially, in an age where, 20 years from now, or years ago, we didn't have the same public safety concerns that we have to be worried about now. So how to kind of work all of that together and still make it financially viable to bring these things to Westchester.
Thank you. Mayor DiBaptiste.
Thank you. I would say, whoever said it has to be holistic, it does. It has to be a big event that benefits the entire borough. Some of these smaller events haven't benefited the entire borough. The Christmas parade does. The restaurant festival does. Some of these smaller events that we waive fees for, like at Marshall Square, that benefits that neighborhood, that community. And even though it's open to all of the borough, quite frankly, it's not participated by all of the borough. Porch Fest, when it was under my wing, the police and the borough and Public Works, they almost got everything carte blanche except for a few things, because we wanted to make sure it was a success. And then with that, the second and third year, they expanded their footprint. So their price went up. Each year they expanded their footprint. They got an idea of what the cost would be. They objected, but they expanded their footprint. And I think if we look at this for all of these events, they have to enhance and benefit the entire borough, not just a segment, not just a quadrant, not just a community, not just a neighborhood. They need to, not just nonprofits, they need to benefit the entire community and be for the entire community, like a restaurant festival and like a Christmas parade, which we've helped subsidize the expense. We've done that, I think, the last 2 years that I know of, perhaps even more, I'm not sure of. but we need to look at that. And when these prices were done, I think in 2019, before COVID, if we take a look at it now, those expenses might be doubled. I mean, if you look at it now, they're not going to be less. They should be more. So, because expenses have gone up, and this borough, even though we've been generous to people who have come, and I think the council has been generous, right now, until we get a bigger tax base, you're looking at the budget. You know, you're trying to balance the budget as it stands with all these unexpected things. So I think it needs to, one key thing, and I'll sit down, is it needs to benefit the entire borough. And some of these things, which are great organizations, they don't benefit the entire borough.
Thank you. Any further comment?
I just have one question. Has anybody brought up like the idea of maybe a scale for the fee structure versus just kind of a flat rate? It might be subsidized in other areas or forgiven in some. It's just the thing that kind of popped in my head.
And how many hours? So if you're doing a rate that ends pretty quickly, your fees are less. You're doing a test. You want to do something that might happen. You're going to get 2 hours. Parks and Recreation, it does a great job, needs budget. They can staff, and they can budget, and they can cut out. And, you know, this is where our budget dollars can go. Figuring out how we can get Parks and Recreation. That's not fair. If we can get more events initiated by the then, and have a Parks and Recreation. Then I think, you know, this money will come back to the borough. But a lot of this generosity that you're showing to so many of these organizations, it doesn't come back to the borough directly. Because sure, which are very important. Health of our business is very important. But it's not benefiting the borough. And it benefits a lot of things that are critical to the entire. Has to be about. To expand the Parks and Recreation. I mean, Keith has the wonderful idea. But it's not me. And he's a budget. And he means that again.
Thank you.
Just one other thought. I mean, agreeing with the mayor on the benefit for the whole town. You know, for my organization, we're not looking for, you know, a charitable from the borough. We're just looking at the costs being reoriented to being what the true unexpected costs for the borough are. So, because right now, you know, for instance, with the posting of $100 per block, you know, I think there's a reasonable argument to say that it is not within the parking department $100 an hour, like to write up a couple signs and post it on one block, that is a staff time equivalent to $100, especially when it's done within the normal 9 to 5 operation. That ordinance, for instance, was really probably created more to capture when you have Pico or Aqua coming into you and saying, we need to shut down this block, to kind of capture that. So those are the pieces where I think we can come at it. I mean, so either, or we can say that, you know, this is a revenue generator for the borough and that's why we want to keep it. But the possible trade-offs there are, you know, if it comes to a, you know, that delta point where it's no longer affordable and outside organizations decide we can't host these events anymore, that isn't going to mean more revenue for the borough. That means we're at the stagnant place we're at right now. And you're also going to lose those community events, which your residents tell you that they like. So I think there's a way if we can kind of get a working group together and kind of really dig into this issue and come to council with a more thorough piece. But I would just ask council to kind of direct, the whoever you want to see within, the borough administration, police department, et cetera, to kind of work on that problem. And if there's outside organizations, I'd obviously be very happy to be part of that conversation as well.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I would actually think the borough should be the one looking at everything and proposing the fees versus the organizations that pay the fees trying to estimate how much it costs the borough and telling the borough what you think it costs. Because I think some of your ideas are, they're thoughts, but unless you're Barb sitting there on a daily basis looking at these numbers, I think, you might not know some of the expenses that happen that actually are there and baked in. So I would prefer that we start from the inside of the borough to look at it and maybe see if there is adjustments that can be made if there are versus just the groups that are putting the events on, right? Because it goes back to what the mayor said, most likely if these costs were calculated 7 years ago at this point, 7 or 6 years ago, that they're actually higher. So it's costing the borough more than what they're charging. And so the conversation's there, to look at it and are there improvements? Because again, it goes back to the fact that I sit here and every month, somebody's asking for a fee waiver, and we sit here and we give them out, like, as opposed to doing that. Not quite sure who we're giving what to at what time. And, I'd rather see us relook at the fee structure and hold to it and stop giving out willy-nilly, fee waivers all over the place. So that's kind of my thought there. So maybe you take another stab at looking at it or something and tell us what you think, and we'll start there, would be my thought.
Yeah, we can certainly put, a calculation together for next month, and then we can review that, and if we want to make changes. Yeah, I'm more than willing to do that, so.
Thank you. All right, action items, and these are going to be purchasing approvals 1 through 7 here. I'll read them off and then we will discuss and take a vote. $10,830 to CCI Consulting. That's for coaching and remediation sessions for borough. $14,000 to Eagle Point Gun. That's for 9mm and 22 caliber ammunition for the police. $27,830 to JP Smith Contractors. That's the pressure washing and sanding at Goose Creek. $29,402. That's the next gen automation. And that's annual service contract that covers various buildings within Westchester Borough, maintained by Westchester Borough. $13,496.52 to Portoff. And that is the expenses to collect, delinquency expenses to collect the stormwater protection fee. $12,540 to USALCO, phosphorus removal. And finally, $64,153 for signal service, and that's for a traffic signal controller box. Are there any questions about any items 1 through 7?
No.
Any public questions or comments? All right, seeing none, any objections to approving these purchases? All right, we could call that a 3-0 decision. Item B, motion to approve contract for police service with East Bradford Township. That was discussed previously in the Public Safety Committee meeting. Sean, if you just want to give us a brief synopsis.
Talk about the money. What East Bradford proposed, and I agreed that that is a fair offer, and the borough, I recommend the council agree, would be year-over-year increases in the amount paid to the borough that equate to the year-over-year salary increases in the recently ratified labor contract. I like that approach because the expenses, because in the police department, about 75% of our expenses are related to personnel. And I'm confident in talking with Josh that we can keep the non-personnel related expense growth underneath a year-over-year percent growth of the salaries and wages. So it really benefits us to index this contract increase to the salary wage increase because we can control costs below those 4%. And some years have a mid-year 1% bump, but generally 4% per year. We believe we can control those non-payroll expenses below that. So we think we're doing quite well. And when we projected it out, this worked out to be about 1/6 or 16% of our overall police department budget. And that makes sense because we have 6 officers assigned in our force to patrol that sector in East Bradford Township. So I was really happy with the monetary proposal. I think it's fair for both sides.
Thank you. Any questions from my colleagues? Any public questions, comments? Any objections? Seeing none, we could approve item B. Motion to approve the defined contribution 401A plan amendment.
I would ask the committee table this item because we did not get the attachment posted for your review. I did check the website, it wasn't there. But just for information's sake, this is going to address the finding we had in our pension audits from the Auditor General. One of the findings was you can't have a pension plan with loan provisions in it. And that was a prior finding, so we're just correcting that. We're taking the loan provisions out. And while we are in this stage where we haven't officially changed the plan, we're not honoring any loan requests at this point in time. And we've probably only gotten 2 or 3 in my whole tenure here, loan requests, knowing, because my office is right next to the HR director. I help process, I always sign these things. This is just not a common occurrence.
Thank you. Any comment?
Just a comment that I was actually digging around looking for the amendment in that 64-page document, could not find it. So you answered my
I
question.
apologize for that.
Thank you. And so we will be tabling item C to next month. Okay, thank you. Item D, motion to approve the DCED multimodal transportation grant resolution for the South High Street streetscape improvement projects. And that's a grant for the South High Street corridor. It's a little over $1 million.
It's the same grant we applied for last year, and we were awarded $750,000 for material upgrades. We think that's going to get done at least 2 blocks worth from Minor to, I always forget, sorry.
Price.
Not all the way to Price. Thank you.
There you go.
2 blocks south to Union. And then phase 2 would take care of Union to Price/Magnolia Streets. And that phase is going to cost an additional about $1.3 million. So we're going to ask DCED for another grant to see if they would fund us for this one.
Great. Any comments? Any public comment? Any objections to approving that grant? All right, seeing none, we approve item D. Item E, motion to amend the 2024 SPF capital budget, the Goose Creek Stormwater Management Facilities. And it looks like that was a bid for the rain gardens, and it was awarded to Premier Concrete.
Yeah, so we're looking to amend the stream protection fund to increase the grant line item and the capital expense line item by $131,848. This is for the bid that was presented last night to Premier Concrete. The total bid received was $246,848, and we had an original grant budget of $115,000. So this is just to make sure that, you know, our revenues are offset by our expenses. And this expense is going to be paid by 2 grants, a DCED ARPA small water grant and the DEP Growing Greener.
Thank you. Any Comments, questions? Any public comment? Any objections? Seeing none, we could call item E, approve item E. Item F, motion to approve the 2024 Finance Committee meeting minutes. Any comments? Any public comments? Any objection to approving those meeting minutes? Seeing none, we can move them to being approved. And under other business, item 5, it looks like we're going to have a request here from the fire department.
Good evening, Justin McClure, Assistant Fire Chief. For the benefit of Mr. Travis, at Public Space Safety this evening, I spoke about the fire department was able to find a loaner ladder. Jeff actually has a picture of it up on the screen. It is a 1989 Simon LTI. Aside from its age, the design and capabilities are almost the same as our frontline ladder that's out of service. In terms of that piece of apparatus, the repairs have begun with council's authorization of the funds from the insurance company last month. It's currently disassembled and on the frame machine in Lancaster County. They are still on a 6 to 8 month repair timeline. This loaner ladder would come from Phoenix Fire LLC in New Holland, Lancaster County, at a cost of $1,500 per month for the lease and an additional $483.33 per month for what it would cost the borough to insure the apparatus. If we went, on the long end at 9 months, that's a cost of $17,850. Also, as I spoke at Public Safety, we were under the incorrect assumption that our insurance policy covered the loaner. It does not. So this is something that would have to come out of the fire department budget. That is obviously, this is not something that we plan for in the budgeting process, nor with the contract process with our municipal partners. The fire department's request of council and the borough is to approve the lease agreement. It is a month-to-month lease. So if 4 months from now, our frontline ladder was, complete, we would be able to turn the truck at the end of the month and we would bear no additional financial burden. The only other unknown cost that I can't give you an exact number on this evening is with the lease, we are responsible for the maintenance of the apparatus. We're not maintaining the one we have now. Our biggest cost obviously is fuel. It has a recent state inspection. We don't have to worry about the normal aerial inspection and non-destruct test, as well as the ground ladder inspections. Those have been done by the owner. So when we do that regular process here come the fall, which is a pretty large expense, we will not have to do that for this truck. We will have to do it for the other one. As far as our ground ladders are concerned, some of those other costs are going to be taken care of by the insurance claim because they have to be done due to the repairs. I will let Mr. Metric or Barb speak to financially how the borough is investigating, to make up that gap.
Thank you.
This is essentially an unbudgeted expense. It would have to come out of cash in the fire fund. So we do have some, if there's one fund I'm worried about in our whole portfolio, it's the fire fund. For a couple of reasons. It's already a fund that gets low at certain times of the year. It's also a fund that we don't have total, I don't know if this is the right word, total sovereignty over, because it's a fund that we contract with five other municipalities to agree that we will manage it. Now, this is $17,000 in a $1.4 million annual budget. We're not talking about a lot here. We're talking about, less, a little more than 1% of the budget. But this would have to come out of cash reserves in order to fund it. The alternative is for the company to continue to operate and get a loaner truck from the neighboring fire company for calls where this type of apparatus is needed.
I mean, my comment is it's a public safety issue and we shouldn't shortchange public safety. So I'm okay with that expense. Welcome comments.
My question is, how much is in the fire fund cash? How much do we have right now?
We've booked all of our contributions from our municipal partners so far this year. So the bulk of our revenue is in the books already. So factor that into the number I'm about to give you. 858,000 is the cash balance in the monthly statement. We've salted about 520 of that, making 5% interest. But we do have some bills coming due. We've got a brush truck we got to pay for. That's 100,000, something north of 100,000. There's no big capital expense hitting this year other than that one. And the next big capital expense is going to be an engine that won't be delivered for a long time, apparently. So
Correct.
there is some time there.
The 5-year contract calls for the replacement of one of the frontline engines. That budgeted amount is 1.3 and change. We got an initial estimate this week of 1.259. Now that doesn't include equipment. I expect that we will spend all $1.3 million. However, the current contract runs up at the end of 2027. And right now with lead times, if we ordered that truck today, which obviously we're not going to do, any manufacturer is going to tell you, see you in May or June of 2028. So there's a little bit of time that, we're going to have that money. Not that I'm, again, that's a Barb and Sean thing, but we're not going to see that expense anytime soon, I guess is the point.
And we made an additional $40,000 in interest, correct?
That was in the general fund. This is the fire fund, which is a separate fund.
Right, but we got to take money out of somewhere.
So we would be taking out of the fire fund, the Pliget reserves that has about $500,000 in there right now, which is earning interest in Pliget and earning the good rate. So
Right. I mean, I'm not going to shortchange public safety. That's my opinion.
I just have a question, general accounting question about, can we split the cost across multiple funds? Is there a way to do that, or does it have to all come out of one bucket, basically?
I mean,
Or does it get a little squirrely with
well, you're going to have, transfers on both sides. So, and again, since they're unbudgeted, you're going to have unfavorable line items there. But if that's, we can do it. We can do a transfer from the general fund into the fire fund. If that's what you want to, just making sure that we account for it the right way.
Yeah, I feel pretty strongly that we should use fire fund dollars for fire fund expenses, because that'll help us understand our operating and capital costs over the long term. The stricter we are about the boundaries between our funds, the better we'll be off. Better we'll be in the long run. We have a budgeted transfer from the general fund into the fire fund that counts for the borough's share of operating the Westchester Fire Department, and that went up, as you recall, a lot because we went through that whole discussion last year in the budget process. There's also a very small, much smaller transfer that goes from the fire fund back to the general fund to pay for the overhead. Barbara's time, my time, the accountant's receivable time, Dave March's time, all the time that we spend, the overhead for running the fire department. But I'm not in favor of transferring 17,850 from the general fund.
Yeah, but so what I'm hearing though is, although you say it's a little tight in the fire fund budget, we do have a decent chunk of change in there. And also, if for some reason we went down to zero, we could transfer from the general fund into the fire fund if we really had to, right? So we have a plan B, I guess, right? Right, exactly. Well, that's I guess that goes back to my point. It sounds like to Brian with an eye's point, it's a public safety issue, right? And it's 17,000. We have the money. We are not going down to zero anytime. To Brian with a wise point, we can move money from the general fund to the fire fund if for some reason we went down to zero, which we're not going to do. So all these, it seems like, yeah, I'd be fine with this. Let's do it. Let's keep everybody safe. God forbid there's a fire and we don't have the right truck for it and somebody dies, that would be for $17,000. That would be horrible, horrible, horrible.
Right.
So-
Any, thank you. And I totally agree. Any public comment? Any objections up here? Yeah, none. We call that 3-0.
We'll put that on the work session agenda then.
Okay, perfect. And it looks like we could adjourn this meeting at 8:20.